Okay. Also in old business, I would like to have a point of privilege here to introduce David Busch, who is with us tonight. And I asked David to come and speak to us because I know I, for one, attended the last council meeting, and there was a lot of questions and discussion about how rates are set by the PUC and things of that nature that I thought I would like to clarify tonight in this meeting. So with that, Mr. Busch, would you please just fully state your name for the record?
My name is David Lester Busch.
And David, by whom are you employed?
Keystone Alliance Consulting.
And what do you do with Keystone Alliance Consulting? I'm
the principal of the firm, and I am also a rate expert. I do municipal consulting primarily in the areas of management and finance.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about what the business of Keystone is? What do you do?
Is a consulting firm that works across the state of Pennsylvania and in certain cases outside the state of Pennsylvania, mostly to do with water and wastewater utilities and rate setting, the value of systems, and certain other financial aspects of the operations of water and sewer systems, municipally owned.
Fair to say that you have experience with and an understanding of how PUC sets rates?
Yes, I do. I have done a number of rate filings with the PUC that have been successful. I've gone through that process, and while I don't think it is as let's say customer friendly as a municipally owned system, I am quite familiar with it.
And can you tell us how the PUC sets rates for, say, sewer authorities?
It's rates for both water and sewer utilities in the state of Pennsylvania are all approved, that for private utilities are approved by the Pennsylvania PUC. Those rates are submitted in a rate filing. That rate filing goes through a board of review. They are typically looked at, and in most cases they go to hearings, which is a long and expensive process. But ultimately rates are approved by the PUC in Harrisburg. The public has a right to submit comments or to go to Harrisburg to make comments during hearings, but all the hearings occur in Harrisburg.
Okay, so rates aren't set locally?
Oh, no, they are not. There is basically a formula of sorts and procedures that are followed. One of the things that is set in stone with a private utility is that under the law, the utility is entitled to recover a reasonably incurred expenses and a fair return on investment. And in that return on investment is what pays stockholders and helps to keep the private utility afloat.
And you said they can recover expenses as well?
Oh yes, they get all of the normal operating expenses for the system. Okay.
So is it safe to say they can recover or receive, I guess I should say, the operating expenses of the system as well as profit margin on top of that?
There's a profit margin built into their rate of return. The rate of return approaches almost 10% for a private utility.
David, can I ask you two questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman? Aqua, or I should say the private utility, presents all the information to the PUC in asking for the rate increase. And then the PUC just rules on whether the increase was calculated properly.
That is
so
correct.
What you're saying is if a private utility wanted to increase rates, that request generates with the private utility. They make the request and submit documentation to PUC. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And when the PUC would comment that it was, if they, and I've heard the expression, they'll say the rates are reasonable. That is referring to the calculation, not the affordability of the rate.
They're really, the PUC does not look at the affordability of the rate itself. They look at the calculation and the method in which the figures are produced.
So as I understand what you're telling me then is that the economic situation of a particular community is not a factor in whether the rates are reasonable.
That is correct.
So an economically distressed community is not given any sort of due or extra consideration when it comes to setting rates.
Absolutely not. Nothing.
Okay. And
Mr. Busch, I'm sorry, can I make a quick question? I'm sorry, just from one of our participants. After Pennsylvania Act 12, how would Aqua PA recover their $82 million that they would be paying for the Norristown Sewer Authority?
and before we answer that, could you start by saying what Act 12 is?
Yes, thank you.
Act 12 is an act that it was put in place. I don't remember the exact year, not that long ago. Whereby the value of a sewer system after purchase can be determined by two independent parties, basically approved experts in the state that do this, and they basically come up with an average of the two typically, and that is what is the approved asset value of the system. I know that, for example, Aqua has offered $82 million for the Norristown system. Those values still would need to be determined by these experts, and the PUC would ultimately approve the number that becomes the rate base. That rate base is part of that rate calculation that determines how rates are set. Okay, the municipal authority has set rates for years based upon cash flow. Your goal is to cover all of your operating expenses, cover your debt service, and put some money away for the future for capital improvements. Okay. A rate setting for the PUC, it isn't cash flow based. It does include all of the operating expenses, but in addition to that, it returns or provides for a return on investment. In the most recent filings that I've seen from Aqua, that number is 9.75% of the system's equity. Okay, so if the system, for example, Aqua, had 50% equity in the Norristown system, that meaning that they paid cash for that asset. Okay, 50% of it was cash. Okay, they would get 9.75% times 41 million, or 50% of the $82 million. Okay, on the other 50% of the asset that is debt financed, they would get their return, whatever their cost of debt they'd get back. That's currently, I would estimate, at about 4.75%. So all of that would become a revenue requirement. Those revenue requirements would ultimately be added to, or those expenses for return would be added to the operating expenses, and that would become the total revenue requirement for the system. Whatever that is as a percentage greater than what the current revenue is would ultimately be an increase. Now, there's a lot done in a rate filing as to the structure of rates, but the structure of rates is not moved that quickly, and that partially explains why Aqua has so many rate zones. Currently, I think they are up to 8 different rate zones for their sewer operations in the state of Pennsylvania alone. And ultimately, they try to combine those over time because of the expense of filing different rate filings for each rate zone.
Okay. And again, to be clear, are you saying that the economic climate of a location and the history of that location's rates are not considered in the reasonableness calculation for setting future rates?
No, they are not. Okay. There may be comments from the Consumer Advocate's Office but ultimately that doesn't carry the day. It's are the numbers filed correctly and calculated correctly? And it's the operating expenses plus that return on investment that I spoke about.
So is it fair to say that if you're in a location where rates have been pretty low historically, once the system is taken over by a private entity, sharp increases can follow?
Yes, it is quite common though that after a purchase, there is a rate freeze in some cases. That currently looks to be about 3 years, seems to be the norm. They used to be a little bit longer, but that just increases the amount of rate shock, if you will, after that period wears off. Because during that time, the private utility might have been back 2 or 3 times for rate increases from the time the sale is announced to when the sale actually closes to when that rate freeze is over. You could have 3 different rate increases in that period of time. In many cases, those rate increases are about 18 months apart with the private utilities.
Okay. And do you have experience, or have you ever come across situations of, in general, what happens to utility rates once they are privatized, once the system is privatized?
Oh, the history speaks for itself that, they typically go up. I mean, I don't know of any circumstances where they have gone down for all of the ratepayers. They might in a few cases, just depending upon the rate structure. But in most cases, all customers see an increase.
And are those cases often large increases after that 3-year period is up?
Absolutely.
You used the word rate shock. Is that what you're talking about?
I would think that any rate increase that is in double digits would cause some rate shock. And those increases are often double digits and they go well beyond that 10% level. They can go, and I've seen rate increases as high as 60-70%.
Mr.
Wow.
Chairman,
Yes.
if I may, just to clarify, Mr. Busch indicated that there were 7 or 8, 9, whatever the number was, rating districts within the Commonwealth. I think I've seen documentation as to comparing our existing rate compared to rates within those 7, 8, 9 districts. I don't know if Mr. Busch has that information available, but not projecting what rate zone the Norristown would be in, could you indicate to us what are the rates in those existing rate zones compared to the rates presently charged by this authority to its customers?
Trying to do is following up to what Ed inquired, is a plotting of the rates in the different zones, which there are 7 zones and one zone has 2 parts to it. So there's really 8 zones.
Or we can see it now.
Okay.
David, can you explain to us what it is that we're looking at?
Okay, what you're looking at is a chart for monthly charges, okay, under different rate assumptions. The bottom, which is a blue line, represents the Norristown Municipal Waste Authority. And you can see over on the left-hand side at 0, a customer would pay $10 per month, okay, under the Norristown Municipal Waste Authority's rates.
And Mr. Busch, you said at 0. What does the bottom line indicate? Monthly usage. How is that measured? You have, certain numbers down there. For example, 1,200. What does that mean?
That is measured in water usage from the water company. The sewer authority obtains those records and bills each customer accurately based upon the monthly water usage. And that's pretty typical in the industry, but the average customer in the Norristown area uses about 4,800 gallons, which is that yellow highlighted band in the middle of the page. and that reflects where the average customer falls.
So if I'm reading your chart correctly, the average use generates a monthly bill somewhere in the 30, 32, 33, $34 zone.
It's currently $32.15 for the
Okay.
Norristown Municipal Waste Authority for a customer using 4,800 gallons.
Okay, thank you. And what are the other lines on your chart?
Each of those lines represents a different rate zone, and the rate zones I've numbered 1 through 8. I believe rate zone 1 has subclasses in it. Okay. But you know, we've used the main rate there for rate zone 1, and you can see the different rates are higher depending upon the zone. In all cases, the Norristown rate is lower than every other rate zone, with the exception of rate zone 6. Okay, rate zone 6, they can see out here at about 7,200 gallons a month. Those lines cross. Rate zone 6 is actually a relatively small zone, and it's based upon the structure of that rate zone and the usage charge. I believe they charge $4.80 per 100 cubic feet, or per 1,000 gallons, excuse me.
And what makes zone 1 different than zone 2? And what is zone 1 versus zone 2 versus zone 3?
They are identified by specific areas of the user base of Aqua's utility. They are typically, they start off as geographic. They are not always, okay? And in the case of a purchase, sometimes there is a rate zone, a new rate zone added, okay? Ultimately, as I said earlier, the private utilities seem to want to compile these zones together, ultimately into single zones or limited number of zones, because each rate filing costs money. And if they push the zone 1 and zone 2 together to form one zone, they're not spending twice as much money doing that rate filing.
To complicate the situation, there are 3 facilities in Montgomery County that Aqua owns: Limerick and 2 other smaller facilities. One is in rate zone 1, one is in rate zone 3, and Limerick is in its own rate zone. So while in theory it's possible that it might be geographically oriented, it really isn't in practicality in many cases. So it would be hard to say what rate zone Norristown would go into, or Norristown may even have their own rate zone. So I say that just because it would be difficult for, I think, Mr. Busch to come out and say this would be the rate for Norristown once they got purchased by Aqua.
It would virtually be impossible for me to make a statement where you would end up. Okay.
But safe to say that, and as you mentioned, Mr. Thompson, rate zone 1 is the top line on this chart or this graph. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's true, actually.
Which one is zone 1? Which line?
I believe zone 1 is here, if you
Okay.
can see my pointer.
Yeah.
And zone 1, currently the average customer at 4,800 gallons per month pays $67.48.
And zone 1 is a Montgomery County Aqua facility?
There is one Montgomery County Aqua facility in zone 1, along with a number of other facilities.
Okay, I understand. And the average rate is in the 40s.
Well, again, the average, again, is out here in the yellow band, and that's where that
Oh wow, yeah.
that $68 comes out.
Gotcha.
Almost $68.
Wow. Okay.
And I believe it's actually this one here, which is the second one, 2
Okay.
up, or maybe 3, depending upon if you see this other blue one. I apologize, these aren't the easiest to read. I have the numbers here, so that's why I can read off the exact figures.
But that zone one average rate is $68. And again, our average rate in Norristown is
32.
52. Okay, interesting. All right. Thank you for sharing that chart.
Not a problem. If I can, just for a moment, I started to explain how the rates are set by the PUC. I have a small graphic that, to exhibit that would show that as well. If you'd
Great.
like. This is a calculation of an assumed purchase of the Norristown system and a calculation of rates for Norristown independent of any other zone or any other system being combined with Norristown. In this case, the purchase price of $82 million. We've estimated a percentage of equity. Again, Aqua typically has about 50% of their assets are debt financed and 50% of them are actual equity in the system. The estimated annual interest rate on the debt financing, as I said, was 4.75%. The estimated return on rate base is 9.75%. So you calculate a weighted average based upon the amount of equity, and you come up with a weighted average return on rate base of 7.25%. So 7.25% of $82 million comes out to this total of $5,945,000. That is part of the annual rate of return, rate base, or excuse me, annual rate requirement or revenue requirement of the system. You would add to that the operating expenses, excluding any depreciation. For the authority, about $2 million. Adding those two numbers together, you come up with a total annual revenue requirement of $7,945,000. Currently, the total operating revenues of the sewer authority are about $4,750,000. That leaves a revenue shortfall under the PUC approach of $3,195,000. Under this scenario, assuming I have all of the assumptions correct, which I, most likely don't have precisely correct, but I don't think I'm that far off, there would be an estimated required rate increase initially of 67.3%.
That would just be a one-year rate increase.
That would be a one-year rate increase, which would be there in future years at that level. You wouldn't have an increase every year of that amount, but there still would be subsequent increases as the private utility filed for another rate filing and a rate adjustment in the future.
So it's possible to have a 67% increase one year, then another year have another double-digit rate increase, then another year have another double-digit rate increase, and so on and so on.
Well, again, all of the subsequent increases and even this increase would be approved by the PUC, but this is how the formula works and how the calculations are done. Again, it's that return on rate base, the 7.25% times the amount of the asset value of the system approved by the PUC.
And that's is another word I could put on that profit for the purchaser.
Within that 9.75% is profit for stockholders, absolutely.
And Barry, I'm just curious, based on your recollection, do you know what our last increase was for customers from the sewer authority?
Our last increase was effective January of 2017. And
what percent increase was it at that time?
It was approximately 2.5%.
About 2.5% 3 years ago.
Yes.
And rates have held the line since.
Correct.
And we've remained profitable.
We've had revenues exceed expenses.
And how much money is being spent on capital improvements down at the plant right now?
We borrowed $10 million for that project, and we are utilizing approximately $1 million of capital money that we have set aside.
And those renovations, that capital improvement program at the plant, or that effort at the plant is, as you said earlier in tonight's meeting, it's moving along quite nicely, right?
Correct. Correct.
And despite not having a rate increase for 3 years.
That's correct. That's correct. And we're not anticipating a rate increase next year. And beyond that, we're trying to assess. We know that the operating expenses will drop because of the efficiency of the equipment that we're installing. So the decrease in the operating expenses hopefully will be commensurate with the additional debt service. And that's our goal, to maintain these rates for an extended period of time.
Maintain our current rates.
Yes.
Mr. Busch, I thank you for your time. Do you have any other documents or charts you wish to share?
Just one other thing that I had
Please.
provided to Barry that is interesting reading, though I highlighted for you. There's a publication on the PUC website, PUC rate making process, which goes into the detail of the process. I will comment that there is really one line within that document that is probably the most meaningful. I changed the type to red type here. It says, under the law, the utility is entitled to recovery of its reasonably incurred expenses and fair return on investment. And ultimately what that means is there's a formula. And I laid out for you what that formula looks like and how it might be applied in the Norristown case.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Busch. I have no other questions. Do any other board members have questions?